So just a reminder that if you have questions as you hear this information coming at you very quickly, we've got cards. If you need a card, just raise your hand and Roxanne or someone will run them out. So Erin, from Director of Stearns County Emergency Management.
All right, briefly, I just like to talk a little bit tonight about how emergency management plays into situations when we may have rising water levels or flooding emergencies. There are 3 different websites that we have listed and will be available for the presentation as well. The first one talks about FEMA and flooding, and that really gets into some of the things where we talk about mitigation projects, where we have significant flooding issues that are repetitive loss for property owners, and we may be involved in the purchasing of a home. There are very stringent guidelines for these programs, talking about 50% of loss on a repetitive cycle to your property. There's a lot of information about the FEMA level programs as they relate to flooding and how our office can help to facilitate some of those discussions if you're interested in talking about that. Next is Minnesota Homeland Security and Emergency Management. That is our state agency for emergency management, and talks a little bit more about what we can do as property owners to help mitigate some of the effects that flooding may have on our property. Out on the main table in the hallway, I do have some yellow brochures that talk about 6 different strategies that you may want to consider if you have flooding concerns or issues on your property. Lastly, up here is our Stearns County Emergency Management website. If you visit the website, some of the things that you're going to find out are ways in which our office helps the National Weather Service in disseminating information about flood emergencies. It talks about programs where we'll make a phone call to you to let you know that we're starting to be concerned about rising water levels in the county and things that you might want to consider doing as a property owner. It talks about places where you can find sand and sandbags to begin some of those projects if that's something that you're needing to do. We really work to support public safety agencies when flooding emergencies are taking place throughout the county. So, with that,
Thank you, Erin. Up next, putting another piece to this puzzle is Phil Wotruba from the Pollution Control Agency.
If I trust myself walking on those stairs, I'm kind of a hyper guy and like to pace around a little bit, but thank you all for letting me speak to you tonight. And I'm going to talk about how Two Rivers Lakes kind of fits into the state of Minnesota's new approach for monitoring and assessing lakes and streams and doing intensive watershed monitoring in the 81 major watershed areas in the state of Minnesota. We call them 8-digit hydrologic unit codes, and I have a map outside on the table of the Mississippi River Sartell watershed, which is the 8-digit HUC, or hydrologic unit code, that covers Two Rivers Lake, the one that we're here to talk about today. So why am I even here in the first place? It all relates back to 1972 with the passage of the Clean Water Act. And that goal is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. So Two Rivers Lake is impaired for nutrients. So we got some work to do with Two Rivers Lake. You know, one of the main issues here tonight, it sounds like it's groundwater quantity. But I'm going to be talking about it from a quality standpoint. But when we look at the very end game, it's going to be implementing practices which will reduce, hopefully target reducing that influx of water into the system so we can keep nutrients and the sediment that's tied with that excess water from entering the lake. So anyways, this act is a framework to protect and restore water quality for our nation. And it addresses point and non-point source pollution. So our tool for addressing impaired waters in the state of Minnesota and our nation is this called this TMDL, or Total Maximum Daily Load. And it's basically a pollution diet for a surface water resource. And that's a picture down there. And you guys probably all know where that lake is. That's Little Rock Lake, and that's what it looked like in 2008. So it wasn't a very pretty picture. We got an ongoing TMDL going on that lake right now where we put together the equation, this equation up here. I wish that would have printed a little bigger. But that equation takes into all the factors, the waste load for the point sources, the non-point source, which is basically what we got going into Two Rivers Lake. And we have a safety factor in there, and we have a reserve capacity for future growth. Now the state, the old approach, how the state used to address impaired waters, was this single parameter TMDL. So it was kind of a shotgun approach. We'd take care of an impaired water in the northwest part of the state. We'd address one maybe in the southeast, one in the central part of the state. It was kind of a random shotgun approach. And it was kind of the 100-year plan. You know, if we keep at this pace, we're going to be doing this for 100 years. And we realized that that's not very efficient, and it wasn't equitable. We weren't getting up to certain parts of the state. We'd only do certain areas. A lot of times it depended on who complained the most is where we would go. So in 2007, and actually before that, 2006, is when this Clean Water Legacy Act passed. And this is when we started getting more money into the system to do more TMDLs. Prior to 2006, we were relying on federal funding to do these total maximum daily load projects, and we'd do one here, one there. It just wasn't very quick or efficient, and it just wasn't going very good. And the state realizes our resources are extremely important to us as citizens. So 2006, the Clean Water Legacy Act passed. And then, okay, let me go back to that slide. Well, then in 2008, the Clean Water Legacy down here, this is this logo you guys have probably seen. In 2008, us voters passed this Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment, which now we got funding to do more of these TMDL projects and protection projects. Not only are we dealing with restoration of our surface waters that fall below standards, but we got money to protect the waters that are meeting our current standards. So this is a picture of the Mississippi River Sartell watershed. And I had some maps out there, and I can get more if you would like to see them. But the Two Rivers Lake is in this 8-digit huck. And so when we're looking at managing the surface waters of Minnesota, we kind of start at this level right now. And we look at it from an 8-digit huck level. So in 2016, now this is kind of hard to see. I had some of these maps on the table as well. But Mississippi River Sartell watershed, that 8-digit huck, is right there. And it's in that 10-year rotation. It's a 10-year cycle where we're going to, back in 2007, we decided to go with this watershed approach. So we put all 81 of these. We got 81 of these 8-digit hucks scattered throughout the state of Minnesota. We put them in a 10-digit cycle. So every 10 years, we're going to come into these watersheds and monitor them probably more intensively than they've ever been monitored since, I've been in the environmental business, which has been a while. So in 2016, we're going to be monitoring the Mississippi River Sartell watershed. And, prior to going into that watershed and monitoring it, we'll be looking for advice from folks, partner groups, citizens, to where would be the best place to put our monitoring stations to get that data. And it's all going to be looking at making assessments, getting 2 years' worth of data so we can make our assessments for the surface waters in that watershed. And right now we have some data that's already, where we got assessments made. Two Rivers Lakes was listed on the impaired waters list in 2010. So somebody, maybe within this room, gathered data on that lake that tripped that scale where we realized that we're not meeting the standard that the state set for lakes within this part of the state. Two Rivers Lake is not meeting that standard today. And so that picture right there, there's Two Rivers Lake. Actually, Pelican Lake is not impaired for nutrients, but Two Rivers is. Pelican Lake is impaired for mercury, which most of our surface waters in the state of Minnesota are impaired for mercury. We have a statewide TMDL to address all those waters. So this new watershed approach, it's basically managing the system. And we're looking at it, it's a much more comprehensive approach than what we did in the past. We're looking at the physical, chemical, and biological components of that system. We're looking at it from a restoration and protection standpoint. So, for example, in the Mississippi River Sartell watershed, we'd be looking at strategies to restore that lake to a standard that has been set by the state of Minnesota. Right now it falls below that standards. So we're going to work with citizens like yourself in this room, have meetings where you guys can provide input on how the best, work with that system to bring it back to where it needs to be. tools and procedures. We define the problems, solutions. And one thing I'll talk about a little later here is something passed here this last summer in the legislative session that changed some of the stuff that we were doing, and in a good way. And I'll get to that here in a little bit. But then and now, pre-2008, so pre the Clean Water Legacy Land Act and the amendment, we talk about the pre-2008. So we're going back to the old way of single parameter TMDL approach. So we were basically doing it to meet federal requirements. We're doing what we needed to do to meet that federal requirement. Now we're doing it for clean water for Minnesota. You know, we're looking at it from a watershed-wide standpoint. We went from a kind of tiny scale, you know, maybe it's just a single lake, a small lake, isolated lake, looking at it from a nutrient standpoint, to huge. Like, for example, Lake Pepin. We got a TMDL on Lake Pepin, and I mean, you look at the watershed of Lake Pepin, it's pretty big. So that's a gargantuan TMDL. But now we're doing it on an 8-digit HUC scale, so it'd be like the Mississippi River Sartell watershed. Back in the day, we were looking at just from a chemistry standpoint. Now it's chemistry, biology, physical. Timeline, more than 4 years. Some of these TMDLs, it takes time to do a TMDL the size of Lake Pepin. Well, now we got these watersheds on that 10-year rotation. The goal is to get those watersheds, get everything put together, a watershed restoration and protection plan put together to restore those waters and to protect those waters. And that's the goal, is to get that done in 4 years. So, back then it was just a kind of permit decisions. Now it's to get this plan put together so it fits into local water plans, actions, decisions that can help you folks make, plans to get that water back to where it needs to be. And just some more information here. Costs. Back then, one TMDL, one impairment, maybe on one lake, we'd be talking about high costs, maybe $100,000 just to do one TMDL. Well, now we're doing a whole watershed, which could have, up north here, I'm involved in some of the watersheds that have 500 some lakes, and we're doing that whole watershed for probably less than $400,000, actually. Just to kind of give you an idea what these plans will look like, and if anybody wants to see this, I can send it to you. We got, like I said before, 81 major watersheds in the state of Minnesota, and this is a relatively new approach. Well, right now, there's only been one of these plans drawn up, and that's this Pomme de Terre watershed, which is in west central Minnesota. And it was the first one to get put out there. It came out in March of 2013, and since then, there's been some updates. So actually, you won't see another report quite like this one, because there's been some changes that happened in the summer here that I'll get to in just a little bit. But basically, this is a summary document for local planners. You think about it, you got a whole watershed, and this document was relatively thin. It wasn't very big, maybe 30 pages, and everybody liked it. All the agency people liked it. All the stakeholders liked it. People like yourself liked it because it's short and sweet, and it got right to the point. Plus, this report will have other reports in it as well, like stressor ID and TMDL reports. But like I said, if you have any questions or would like to see more of that, please let me know. But this template is available now. The template has been updated as well, and that template will be used for the Mississippi River Sartell watershed. And I think I'm running out of time, but if I could...
One more minute.
Oh, 1 more minute. Okay. I'm sorry. I had too many slides here, but I knew I'd kind of push my limit here. But anyways, this watershed will be monitored, like I said before, and we got a bunch of watersheds that are in the mix right now. This is that wrap that's going back to the Pomme de Terre. This is the Pomme de Terre watershed, and something very similar will be done to the Mississippi River Sartell watershed. We take the Mississippi River Sartell watershed, and we look at it and say, we got a bunch of these new GIS tools. And we can pull that Mississippi Sartell watershed and look at it with these new tools, and we can get a feel for what's good and what's not so good. Green, in this case, is good. Red, not so good. We can do that with these new GIS tools, which I don't really have time to go into. But if anybody has any questions, let me know. This is Drywood Lake. Pretend this is Two Rivers Lake. And then we're looking at a subshed of Two Rivers Lake. So we start plugging in these tools. And you guys got to let me show this slide because this is a pretty good one here. But anyway, so we started looking at these tools, and it gives us an idea where to target our planning. Where are we going to put our money? We don't have money, our pocketbooks aren't overflowing. We only have so many dollars to go around. So we want to target our implementation practices. So, okay, this circle right there, we got a little bend in the river, and we got some land use changes going on there. Let's go investigate that in the field. Well, this is what they did. They went out and investigated that, and here you can see the stream. And then what looks like high lines, that's actually a fence line. So you can see all that sloughed into the river. So we can use those GIS tools to kind of give us an idea where we should go out and field verify areas. And you can see, once I seen that, and someone told me, well, no, that's a fence line. I almost fell out of my chair. But that's just one example. This Clean Water Accountability Act, that came into play this last legislative session. And this basically is saying that they want to see, milestones and track measuring progress and make sure that we're getting this money for this Clean Water Legacy Act, and they want to see results. So, that's built into these templates. And then, so that changes a little bit from that Palm de Terre, which does not have that language in there. And I better get out of here because I'm going to get the boot. But anyways, that's a wrap. All right, thank you.
You can see the enthusiasm there on Phil. He didn't know I have 5 brothers, so I wasn't sure what I'd do next. But next up is Greg Bird from Soil and Water Conservation. He's got the last big piece to put to the puzzle here, and then we'll get to your questions.
All right, thank you. I'm glad we got to at least see that wall. I finally got on the bright lights of the theater stage. My mom would be so proud. I'm going to talk about some potential solutions and some ideas of what we can look at. Basically, we looked at the modifications that have happened in the watershed, and some of the previous speakers have talked about that. We've seen about 4,000 plus or minus acres of wetlands that have been either drained or modified through agricultural or other residential development. And a lot of that's due to ditching or tiling or other modifications and just loss of natural storage. And the red areas that you see on this big area of the watershed are all what we call restorable wetlands that have been mapped. So we took just a slice of this and kind of blew it up, just a section. And it gives you a little better idea of how much has been modified. And then to give you a perspective, we looked at that 4,000 acre area or acre feet of area. So if you filled that 1 foot deep, that 4,000 acres of wetlands that have been drained, you could basically make the area, the 756 acres of the lake, come up 5.3 feet if you had a plug in it and nothing was running out. So that gives you an idea or perspective how much water is coming off the landscape. So what can be done? Options necessary to address it is to store more water on the landscape in these upland areas off from the lake, slow the water down and increase infiltration, try to get it to go under the ground. A lot of times we say keep the raindrop where it falls. So some practices for that are wetland restoration or creation, modification to farming practices, just changes in cover, maybe different tillage practices. Water and sediment basins are like rural stormwater basins in fields or areas like that. Rain gardens and buffer strips. So what is being done? DNR and others are monitoring the lake levels or wanting to work with you the way it sounds on monitoring the lake levels and the status of the fishery. The Lake Association has been maintaining some water quality data, which is good, and sharing that with us. MPCA is doing their thing, which we heard a lot about from Phil, right? And the City of Albany has also been working on some monitoring outputs for the area that drains in from that. And there's also the TMDL process that was just spoke about. The Soil and Water Conservation District that I work for is working with a lot of the ag community, the lakeshore owners, the cities on voluntary projects. And we also applied for a Clean Water Fund application through the Board of Water and Soil Resources to do some additional assessment in this area. So that would fit within some of the funding that Phil was talking about. Now, what have we done? I'm going to show you a few pictures of some projects that we've completed in the watershed that will make a difference as far as storage. This is a wetland restoration that was completed a few years back. You can see there's two different areas on this rural property. That's just a different look from that basin and how much water is stored just in one of these areas. Grass waterway, where you can see some erosion that was occurring from the runoff coming in a concentrated area. Again, some erosion there. And then a waterway that was created in that same area. So you don't always think of water storage or water retention from this, but it actually does create more water infiltration by just having the grass cover in those areas rather than just letting it run off. And there's after it grows up. Another one in the Two Rivers, Stearns County Park, Two Rivers Park. This is a wetland restoration that was done. You can see the pool that was created there when the park was developed and how it's growing in with vegetation, so there's some nutrient uptake as well. City of Albany and North Lake also did some restoration along the shoreline there and created an infiltration basin adjacent to the lake. You can see how that's growing in. And this is the Two Rivers Lake targeted BMP implementation plan, the Clean Water Fund application that I was talking about. We're taking a look at the entire watershed, if we get funded, and trying to assess where some storage will be available and then try to target that, hopefully with your assistance. And so we would accelerate the implementation of those practices that can help and then try to implement best management practices that can apply to those areas. These are some of the things that we've seen happening in the last couple of years in the watershed that are obviously related to some of the flooding and erosion concerns. And I'll just flip through them quick. But there's a lot of water coming off the landscape, and it's directly running off without any storage. These are real life things that are happening in the watershed. I didn't take these from other places. One other thing, there's an example map out there. When the watershed district was alive and going, there was a study showing some watershed storage areas that could be used. And this is available and can be used and is out there as far as mapping of some areas that had potential water storage features. And I'm at the end of my time.